Hi, and welcome to the Mediatwits number 149. I'm Mark Glaser, Executive Editor of PBS MediaShift. Today we'll be talking about lies and viral content. Can we stop the spread of viral content by debunking them? A new report from the Tao Center all about lies, damn lies, and viral content from Craig Silverman. We'll talk about that report, what it found, and possibly solutions for stopping the spread of misinformation online. First, a word from our sponsor. Running your own business requires focus, and so does parenting. Mediatwits podcast sponsor NextSpace created a place where parents could give their best quality of attention to both co-working space and childcare space under one roof. Learn more at nextspace.us/nextkids. And indeed, I am at NextSpace in Potrero Hill, San Francisco, and my son Everett is next door in the childcare space. So we're going to be talking about viral content, the spread of falsehoods, and what news organizations and reporters can do. I want to introduce our panel first. Andrew Lee from American University, Craig Silverman, founder of Emergent.info and fellow at the Tao Center, George Kelly at the Bay Area News Group, Jay Hathaway in Seattle for Gawker.com and the antiviral column, Michael Calderone at the Huffington Post in New York, and Jefferson Yen, our producer of the Mediatwits. So Craig, you spent, about 6 months looking at the spread of basically hoaxes, rumors, etc. online, and we know there's just a mass swamp of them, as has been said. What were your findings? What's the problem, and what are some solutions that you came up with?
Yeah, so you're right. It was about 5 or 6 months, and the way we went about doing it was we would myself and a research assistant, we'd look for rumors and unverified claims that were out there. It could be a crazy viral story about something happening somewhere in the world, or it could be a claim about something out of a war zone. And so we wanted to see how news organizations talked about rumors and unverified claims, and we wanted to see if over time did they stay with the story and actually stick with it and see if it became true or not. Did they update? Did they correct? And also in those early moments, how do they treat that rumor? The ones who talk about it, what are the ways that they deal with it? And is that responsible or in some ways irresponsible? And I mean, I would say in a nutshell, I think for the most part we found stuff that is, in some cases, maybe confirms a lot of the worst suspicions people had about how some news sites are just jumping on everything and how viral stuff spreads. And there's also some stuff that is a little bit depressing as well. One of the things that really stood out was when we looked at the news organizations and the news websites specifically that would kind of deal with this stuff, that would jump on it. What we found in the vast majority of cases is they're not actually doing any reporting. Usually what they're just doing is kind of saying, hey, there's this thing out there, we're going to link to it, maybe we'll try to put a funny headline on it or some kind of attractive headline on it. And that's all they typically did. And so what we saw was, a certain group of news websites that would jump on anything would often write headlines that declared something that was a claim to be true. So that's misinforming people right there. And then they would never come back to it. So they kind of jump, they point to it, and they move on. There's not a lot of verification going on. There's not a lot of reporting going on. And obviously the interest there is, hey, in the early moments, let's get this up, let's get traffic, let's get attention. And then because they haven't really invested a lot of effort in it, the idea that they would come back to it hours or days later and say, by the way, this has now been proven true or false, it seemed pretty unlikely that they would after they invest such little effort at the start. So there's the lack of reporting and verification, just sort of linking out to other news sites or places, often having headlines that are declarative about things that aren't even known to be whether they're true or false. And sometimes they would use question headlines where, is there a 40-foot crab off the coast of, a village in the UK? And obviously the answer was no, but if they asked it that way, people might be more likely to click on it. So those are some of the pieces, and the last one I would say is we didn't see a lot of people coming back to the stories that they wrote about, so a lot of them ended up being outpaced by events emerging where they just wouldn't update, they wouldn't correct. And one of the other interesting little pieces was that I would say that the sort of more digitally native sites, like a Huffington Post, like a BuzzFeed, were more inclined to go back and update the original story if they stuck with it than they were to write a completely new story. Whereas websites associated with, say, newspapers would often just sort of leave the original story and then write a new one. So those are some of the key things that came out of it. And the bottom line is that there are a lot of news websites that the way they're treating this stuff and the way that they're not following up on it are actually spreading misinformation. And that's a pretty depressing thing to have to point out.
Yeah, and one of the examples you talked about, you said one of the good examples of debunking was this pumpkin spice condom thing that Durex was offering. What was good about that situation? I mean, why did it work out so well? Why did the debunking work or spread? I mean, this is the big thing. The misinformation tends to spread a hell of a lot faster than the debunking.
Yeah, I mean that's definitely one of the clear things we saw as well, is that the most social shares, the most articles written were in that early stage where it was new, where you didn't know whether it was true or not, and that's where everybody jumped on it. Once it was proven true or proven false, you didn't see a lot of people writing about it for the first time or coming back. The exception that we saw, really the biggest exception, was this pumpkin spice condom thing. So basically what happened was a guy, there were people talking on Twitter making jokes about everything being pumpkin spiced in the fall. And so he spent about 5 to 10 minutes in Photoshop. He mocked up a Durex pumpkin spiced flavored condom, shared that to a couple people. And then from there, people just started scraping and grabbing the image. And it started circulating enough on Twitter that a reporter at Quartz saw it and was sort of like, well, wait a second, is there a pumpkin spice condom people are talking about? And so the first thing she did is, contrary to a lot of the sort of other sites we would see, is instead of her writing an article saying, hey, people are talking about a pumpkin spice condom, maybe it's real, it's funny, she decided, well, I'll reach out to the company and its PR rep to try and get an answer. And so she reached out. She got a kind of equivocal response from the PR agency saying, well, we can't really tell you right now. We're not sure. So she wrote an article saying, hey, it's out there and we haven't gotten a clear answer yet. And so that story got picked up by a few places. Hey, is there a pumpkin spice condom or not? But really within just a couple of hours, the company Durex came out. They gave a comment to BuzzFeed, and they also tweeted out saying, we love people to spice it up in the bedroom, but we can't take any credit for this one. So they had a little bit of fun with it. And the fact that they were fast, the fact that they didn't really kill the joke nature of the whole thing, what happened at that point was we saw a huge amount of articles being written saying, hey, the pumpkin spice condom is hilarious, but alas, it's not true. So I think journalists still said, well, we can still make all of our pumpkin spice condom jokes, and now we can also tell people it's not real. So it was it kept its essence of virality, even though it was at the core of it a debunking. So people still had fun with it, whereas in a lot of cases, the debunker is in the position of being this spoil sport, this know-it-all that actually drives people away.
This is boring. So Jay, you run this antiviral column at Gawker. Is there something to be said? I mean, can you make antiviral go viral itself? Basically, a debunking, can that also get just as much attention?
Yeah, I think so. Some of these stories kind of get a second life when you get new information, and I think the thing to do is to leave the old post up, be honest about what you said, and then kind of reap the benefits of having this entirely new post with, reporting that is sometimes original and adds to the story. And people love it on Facebook because everybody on Facebook wants to be first and they want to look smart. And, if you're the first person to share a debunking of something, it's almost as good as sharing that original weird thing. I mean, I guess you do kind of look like that jerk in the comments sometimes, spoiling everybody's fun when you do that. But people like to do it, and it's not bad for traffic. It's not bad.
Michael, what's your take at Huffington Post? I mean, what do you usually, when there are rumors that pop up, how do you personally treat them, and do you kind of correct within the post, or do you do a new post? I mean, how do you usually, what's the way you handle them?
Yeah, I mean, I would usually correct within the post. I can understand the impulse to do a whole new post because you're reaping the benefits of more traffic. I mean, if I ever need to make a correction on something I'm doing, I try to do it right there. I also try to get out in front on Twitter A situation happened this week where a press release went out that CNN was doing these debates with, they're partnering with a conservative news organization, and somehow the press release got misinterpreted that a conservative radio host was actually moderating the debate, and this got picked up by Politico, interpret it this way, and then Talking Points Memo did a story on it, linking to Politico. And I thought I was going a little crazy because I'd seen the same press release. I didn't take it that way. For me, it's just the simple way of just doing basic reporting. Called CNN, and within 1 minute, I knew that this guy wasn't moderating the debate, that CNN's going to have one of their stars, Jake Tapper, Wolflitz, or whoever, moderate the debate. So my thing, I didn't even have a story on it. I just jumped out on Twitter to matter-of-factly say, for anyone looking at this thing right now, this is inaccurate. It could be read as some sort of subtweet, and I don't want to be a spoilsport either, but I just felt it was important as somebody who's on this beat covering media and has a position where I'm interacting with networks, with news organizations, that I should be going out there and at least correcting it even on Twitter, even though I didn't have a whole story about it.
And why is it so hard? It's funny. Like, I guess people just live their lives so much on social media and online that the idea of calling someone up to check on something, it just seems so difficult. What's so difficult about it?
I honestly don't understand. The Huffington Post started primarily doing aggregation, moved into hiring more reporters, but we still do aggregated posts as well. But, there's been a push to have people, even if you're doing a straight aggregation post, to call somebody for comment, to try to confirm the story, to do that just, one basic step, one email, one phone call. But it's amazing when you see a story that, and Craig gets to this at length in many, many examples in the report, but, you see a story and it's okay, how did Talking Points Memo get this? They didn't call CNN, but you look on the bottom, it says, hat tip to Politico. Okay, I click through to Politico. Politico's already updated their story, but Talking Points Memo hadn't updated their story, but they now are doing a second story on top of it. And you can see in just one example, and this happens every single day, how the misinformation spreads. And for me, I always want to, advance a story, and I find that just one email, one call to say, no, it's not happening this way, it's happening this way, is a way to do it.
And George, it's a good point about things going on social media maybe a little different than what goes on a website. Is there a different standard for the way rumors kind of spread and are checked on social media? We've seen the way Andy Carvin does that, on Twitter. Is it a little bit different on social media versus on the kind of news websites?
It's difficult. We have some of the same impulses, but we're hampered in part by internal standards, personal histories of getting burned with other situations, wanting to both be reflective of the record but also speedy. It's a tension that lives primarily in the breaking news team. Here in the Bay Area, we're often covering protests or gatherings that have the potential to draw, trucks and helicopters and other situations. So you don't want to send things out that aren't true or at least verifiable. And that tension means that we try to have that conversation on Twitter. We have editors who are pretty adept at Twitter use and checking in real time and pushing back on assertions, both by our community of readers and by sources that we may be trying to talk to and get comment from. We're also a little hampered a bit by our legacy systems for content management and connection. We're just now getting comfortable with being on Google as a platform. I don't know that we're ever going to get to Slack.
And Andrew, what do you think? How have things changed now? We've always seen rumors, we've always seen things spreading online, especially. But have things sped up to the point where this is almost out of control, where we need to like bring on waves of debunkers? How can we change the equation online?
Right. Yes. I think when social media was really emerging as a powerful force, not just for internet users, but for the news industry, Craig, myself, and a bunch of other folks, got together, thinking about what does fact-checking mean in this era of social media, right? So folks like Jay Rosen and Jeff Jarvis, we all kind of came to the summit, and we kind of concluded that it's a really hard thing to do well, right? We know that there are some entities that have won Pulitzers and done great things with mostly been a pretty good self-correcting community on Twitter. You definitely still have your crazy rumors that get out of hand. But given the amount of content that goes through Twitter and social media, the number of things that get debunked and rejected and corrected and deleted fairly quickly is still pretty impressive. So I think on balance, given how much traffic there are on these social networks, it's pretty well, I don't want to say under control, but it's pretty well regulated right now. One of the problems, though, I think for mainstream news organizations dealing with this is that, unfortunately, in their calculation, the upside for being first and getting eyeballs and getting traffic is so high, and the downside of being wrong is so low that it just naturally balances to publish first, go for the salacious stuff, and as Craig mentioned, simply by saying, according to this other news organization, thereby absolving yourself of blame, saying, I can blame that guy if it gets wrong, or putting the question mark at the end, which Jon Stewart did a great takedown of news organizations that put crazy lower third headlines and put a question mark just saying, well, I didn't tell you it was true. There's a question mark at the end of this thing. That, unfortunately, is standard practice among most of the mainstream news organizations. And unfortunately, the non-transparency when you're wrong, right, just disappearing an article or changing the text inside of it without having to disclose it, means that the pain is not felt by a news organization. They just kind of remove it, and it doesn't live on in any way. So I think that's, as long as that's the dynamic that's around, you will continue to see this trend of folks who will, shoot first, ask questions later, and just kind of scrub the history of their errors on the net, and that's unfortunate. But I'm somewhat hopeful because sites like Wikipedia, which most people kind of think is, running fast and loose with quality, they have extremely high standards for verifiability and reliable sourcing. So as a backstop, at least, something like Wikipedia has tons and tons of editors looking for corroborating evidence to make sure that what is printed is true and verifiable, and at least it doesn't make into our historical record for the long term as being wrong.
Craig, do you think that's true about the kind of the self-correcting part of it? I know we've heard, I think Nick Denton at one point was saying that a lot, hey, things tend to be corrected over time if people are truly spreading false information. Is that true, or do we really need more kind of outlets like Snopes and like Emergent.info?
So one element of the answer for me is the data we collected, and what we saw was that it was pretty rare overall that you would see the stories that were updated and new stories written and stories that got it right getting more social shares than the stories that got it wrong or that weren't updated. And then, the other sort of data point was we looked a lot at fake news websites. It wasn't a plan when I first started the research, but these sites which look like real news sites and write articles that seem real and get shared by people like they're real, we saw them getting huge amounts of social shares, primarily on Facebook. And we went out and we looked to see if there were debunkings out there, and there was only one case where we saw a fake news article where the debunkings got more shares, but it was a factor of one fake news article, and it was like 11 debunkings from some really major news websites, and they only just barely got more shares. So I don't think that there's a 1-to-1 ratio. Like I think it's true that on one level the internet is an amazing network for distributing misinformation. It's also an amazing network for knocking it down. But I don't see a lot of cases where it's 1-to-1 where the people who have been misinformed get the right information. And I think that that's one of the challenges we have. And so, that was my research. There have been other studies done like that. One that came out last year where they looked at a rumor, I think it was that Jay-Z had died, and they looked on Twitter at the people who had tweeted the misinformation. They looked on Twitter for the people who had tweeted the correction, and there was like almost no overlap between them and overlap between their followers. So I think that's one of the big challenges. I think Wikipedia, though, is a really interesting model in that sense, and a good one to look at, where because they put such an effort and an emphasis on sourcing. Well, what's your source for this? The truth is that if journalists would take actually literally, if they took 5 minutes and looked at the source of a lot of the stuff that they're about to rewrite, they would suddenly realize, like Michael did with this, this debate, that wait a second, it's either not what it seems to be, or there's some elements here that are suspect. And I think that's one of the things that kind of drives me crazy sometimes is literally set a clock, 5 minutes, 10 minutes, follow the sources back, read closely, read carefully, And most of the time you actually find stuff to move the story ahead. Most of the time you find something that other people don't have because so many folks are just doing the hit and run. And so that's almost become one of the things I'm trying to evangelize. It's like, honestly, take 5 minutes. I know you're under pressure. I know you got to produce content. But if you take 5 minutes and follow this back instead of just doing the quick hit, you may find something that gives you something other people don't have.
Yeah, and I wonder with all these stories, like if you went back and actually, ask people, do they really believe that such and such happened? I have a feeling that the vast majority would still believe that that's what happened just because they only remember the original.
Yeah, the belief aspect of this is a really important point, which is that basically even if people do see the correction, but the misinformation is aligned with existing knowledge they have, or particularly aligned with beliefs they have, their worldview, you probably won't even do anything to change their mind anyway. So there's another depressing log to throw on the fire here for you.
And Jay, I'm curious about, it seems like Gawker has really had a kind of an evolution from, kind of throwing everything on the wall, throwing up every rumor, et cetera, to now having what seems like a little bit more of a stronger standard, at least according to what Max Reed wrote about, 2015 and what the sites are going to do. Do you see kind of a new standard when it comes to rumors and trying to debunk things there?
Yeah, I mean, the existence of antiviral as a column is pretty good evidence for that. But I think really the thing with Gawker is that we've always just tried to be really and present gossip as gossip. We are a gossip site. We're also a news site, but that kind of has its place. But in terms of those sort of quick viral things, we've been trying to spread some more skepticism. Hopefully kind of set an example for that to, do what other people aren't doing and say, like, this doesn't really pass the smell test. What else can we find out about it? It makes, like Craig said, the story is a lot stronger when you take that 5-10 minutes. Or, in my case, I have, like, free reign to spend time doing this stuff. So, I think we can achieve even better results there if we keep going with it. Without like straying away from the subject matter that people have always, expected from Gawker.
Yeah.
So,
of course.
Yeah.
Michael, I mean, have things at Huffington Post changed as far as how you get judged as a reporter and writer there? I mean, is it all about hits? I mean, is there a different kind of measurement that might be used not only at Huffington Post, but let's just say at other news sites that might kind of encourage reporters to get it right versus being first?
Yeah, I mean, I can actually say here at Huffington Post that I'm not judged on the number of clicks for my stories. The focus for me is really on reporting good stories on the media, both industry stories and these kind of journalistic, ethical quandaries that newsrooms are facing all the time. It's unfortunate if reporters are judged solely on hits, then yeah, you shoot first and ask questions later. You get a story up there, it gets a lot of traffic, it's a lot of shares socially, and then if it's wrong, you just post another story, you update it or something like that. So I mean, if that's what the metric is for success at certain news outlets, then it's very likely that you're going to have people just publishing at will and not really asking questions later. So I think news organizations are smart not to judge people solely on that. That doesn't mean you don't take hits into consideration. I mean, it's not. We all want readers. The sites we work for want readers. We want readers. So these things are important. It's not like you can get on a high horse and say that it's just all about your journalism and you don't care if anyone reads it. So I think there's a balance there. And if you put too much emphasis or just overemphasize, you're going to get a lot of mistakes, I think.
Yeah. And George, do you think there's a role, I mean, for kind of traditional media in being the debunkers and being the ones that's going to wait 5 minutes or maybe even, 10 minutes to check something? I mean, does that kind of is there a way that this could set them apart and, I mean, show that they're trustworthy and they have credibility? I mean, does credibility matter still?
Credibility matters still. It matters because you've got people who are returning to your site regularly. You've got people who live in communities as you, and you have a responsibility to them to give them a a good media diet, a proper media diet, a correct, not just a correct media diet, but a correctable media diet. One that, yes, you're going to get all kinds of things that you need here. You're going to get candy. You're also going to get vitamins and healthy, regular, food. You're going to get conversations that are open to connection, and if you have a readership like we do, a local readership that's looking to find materials, you have to be more transparent about who your sources are to the extent that you can. You have to be transparent about the processes you use to find news and to update them. And you have to, there's a measure of accountability, and it's necessary. It's the only thing that's going to keep people coming back on a regular basis. We can't simply chase the gossipy hit or the headline just because it's out there.
So thanks a lot. I want to thank our panel, Andrew Lee from American University, Craig Silverman at Emergent.info, George Kelly at Bay Area News Group, Jay Hathaway at Gawker, Michael Calderone at the Huffington Post, Jefferson Yen, our producer. I want to thank Next Space and Next Kids, our sponsor. You can learn more about their program at nextspace.us/nextkids. We'll catch you every week on the Mediatwits at pbs.org/mediashift.